Good morning, everyone. Delighted to be with you all virtually this morning and to talk a little bit about your new Interreg regulation for 21-27 and how we got here. Ivana introduced me. In my role here in the Commission, I've led the negotiations from the Commission side on the new Interreg regulation and indeed on the cohesion policy and shared management regulations. And I've been leading them for quite a while. As Petra said, we're approaching 3 years since the Commission put forward its proposal. And indeed, from the Commission side, it's already more than 4 years since we started internal reflections on what Interreg could look like in the 2020s and how the regulation should be shaped. Or if I wanted to put it in another slightly more depressing way, almost 10% of my life has been spent on this regulation. So be nice to it, please. So my job in the next 15 minutes or so is to tell you what's happened in those 4 years. And as you can imagine, that's a rather difficult task. So it means what I want to try and do is give you more of a flavor for what has happened and how it happened, to talk a bit more about the processes rather than being an in-depth step-by-step description. We've got the whole day ahead of us to look at the detail. And so this is more, as I say, about a flavor of how we've got here. And I want to try and do this in 3 main stages. Where the Commission started from, since I'm very pleased to say a lot of what we proposed survived the whole process. How the co-legislators, the Parliament and the Council, reacted to the Commission proposal, and how this was all brought together through the trilogue process. So looking at the Commission's starting points, the Commission's fundamental starting point, I would say, for the new Interreg regulation was precisely to retain a separate, distinct regulation for Interreg. Those of you old enough to remember a time when that wasn't the case, and there were no specific Interreg rules set aside. So retaining a separate Interreg regulation was key, and it was also important for us to build on what we already have in 1420 and provide more Interreg specific detail. The specificity and uniqueness of a lot of what Interreg does, we felt it was important to capture more of that within the regulation than perhaps we've seen in 1420. Beyond that fundamental starting point then, I would stress 3 main elements, given the time available, about what the Commission was keen to emphasize. Firstly, we were looking for a more strategic approach. We wanted to see more structure and organization going into some of the thinking behind Interreg programs and content. There is, at times, I think I can say this from a regulation point of view, a certain tendency for programs and projects to base themselves on a more of the same approach. We wanted to inject new thinking, new ideas, new possibilities, essentially challenge all of you to dare to be different in how you approach your programs and your cooperation. We wanted, as a second element, to ensure the full integration of external border cooperation within Interreg. A single cooperation regulation should govern cooperation activity across the Union, including on its external borders, and we felt that was a logical step. And thirdly, we wanted to simplify processes and procedures as much as possible. Now, this doesn't mean a free-for-all. We still need some rules after all, but we tried to take a look, and I have to say here, not just for Interreg, but across cohesion policy and shared management. And we tried to ask questions that perhaps have not been asked for quite some time, or dare I say it, even at all. Why do we do certain things the way we do them? Why do we do certain things at all? Do we really need to do them that way? And here, in my view at least, we've included quite a range of radical streamlining measures. I could pick up things like no more annual reports for programs, no more designation of program authorities, just to name 2. But I wanted to touch on 2 particular areas of simplification. One is in relation to audit and management verifications. And if there is one area where the Commission has faced consistent complaints about the level of administrative burden and complexity, it's in this area. And we were determined to address this. And the single audit process we have put in the regulation, which will treat all Interreg programs as a single package, and the accompanying introduction of a risk-based approach to management verifications will massively reduce the audit and control workload of Interreg programs and will allow a reorientation of workload towards program content and delivery. And another key area of simplification that I wanted just to mention is in relation to the flat rate approach for payments on technical assistance. This means no more audit at all, no more management controls at all on technical assistance expenditure, an automated payment system based on program implementation. Now, I'm aware here, and I just diverge a little bit from the process, that not everyone is delighted by these simplifications, but they have survived the negotiation process that I'm about to describe, and they apply. Now, that means change in how these are dealt with and how these operate. And I know some would like to avoid such change. I come back to what I said earlier about the more of the same approach. But overall, both of these two examples on audit management verification, on technical assistance, will deliver drastic simplification and improvements in implementation across Interreg and across cohesion policy. And they need to be embraced wholeheartedly by all programs. Right, I'll get off my high horse and get back to the negotiation process. So this was the framework that the Commission put on the table. How did the co-legislators react? Well, stage 2 of the legislative process, which is the next slide, is where both the Council and the Parliament established their reactions to the Commission proposal. And they do that separately. And they do that over quite a period of time. This, by the nature of the legislative process, is not from one day to the next. The Parliament moved rather rapidly, and by November 2018 already had its position established, although because of their internal procedures, the formal first reading vote in the Parliament actually took place in March 2019, so 10 months after the Commission proposal. The Council established its position on the Interreg regulation in June 2019, so it took over a year to put that on the table. But 1 year on from that proposal, we had the reactions to the Commission's proposal, and how did they look? Well, I would characterize the positions as broadly happy. Maybe I'm a little bit optimistic there, but that's how I would characterize it, but with a number of key concerns. And while both had a number of unique concerns from their institution, in quite a number of areas, both institutions shared similar reactions. Both institutions were unconvinced about the Commission's proposals on the overall architecture of cooperation, in particular in relation to maritime cooperation, and also in the approach that the Commission had proposed on interregional cooperation, where both Parliament and Council were firmly committed to retaining the existing 4-programme approach. Both were, however, very happy with the Commission's proposal for a new dedicated strand for outermost region cooperation. Both welcomed the integration of the external border dimension into the regulation, and both were, I would say, generally happy with the range of simplification ideas included. On some of the more specific aspects, the Parliament greatly regretted the lack of ambition, as it saw it, about the overall funding available for Interreg. It wanted several billion euros more for Interreg than the Commission had proposed. Although here, I have to stress, in the end, the Parliament as an institution did not prioritise this issue within the overall finalisation of the multi-annual financial framework discussions. Although it is in their Interreg position, it is in their overall approach. In the final steps, this was not one of their priority areas. The Parliament also wanted to prioritise support for smaller projects, local level projects, particularly on land borders, and also, and this was even before the health pandemic that we have faced struck, they wanted a prioritization of policy objective 4 type actions within the cooperation framework. On the council side, the report, their position was more focused on ensuring a maximum of flexibility for member states and programs in relation to content, in relation to thematic concentration, and in relation, I would describe as implementation freedom. So limiting the number of rules applying to the operation and functioning of the programs. Once you have the 2 co-legislator positions, it's time to move on to stage 3 of this process. And this takes us to the trilogue process. And that trilogue process started from October 2019. So there was a bit of a gap, as you can see, between the finalization of the council position in June and the start of that trilogue process, which was essentially as a result of the overall exercise on I'm sorry, people, I need to just interrupt for a couple of seconds. If you can give me. Apologies, everybody. I was just building tension. So, yes, on the trilogue process then started 3 or 4 months after, and the trilogue process is a unique exercise. Some might call it weird, particularly if you have to live through it for a long period of time. But every such process is different because you have such a mix of different actors from the different institutions, the level of experience involved, the level of knowledge, and very much the level of political sensitivity of the file. All of these things can have radically different impacts on the negotiation. And for Interreg, I have to say that the discussions were characterized by very pragmatic, friendly, realistic discussions among the actors involved. Large parts of the text being agreed at a technical level before the political level even became involved in the process. Indeed, at times with the Interreg file, finding issues that even needed discussion at the political level became a bit of a challenge because such was the level of agreement that was reached at the technical level. And I have to say that that is not a situation that was replicated for some of the other cohesion policy files. And it's not, I would say, a normal process when it comes to this trilogue exercise. So I think that's indicative of the level of political support and understanding that exists about Interreg and the priority it has both in the European Parliament and in the Council. The Parliament was very open to explanation, to being convinced about pragmatic outcomes that would help deliver effective programs. So clearly the Parliament colleagues are not involved in the day-to-day running of programs, whereas Commission colleagues and some Council colleagues certainly are. But the Parliament was very willing to listen to that level of expertise, to explain why some of their ideas might not work if you translate it down to program level, and were willing to adapt and understand and accept a lot of those points. On some points, however, the Parliament was more firm. And the final outcome on a number of key areas that you're likely to discuss later today, such as small project funds, which the Parliament initial position wanted to see as an obligatory element for all Interreg programmes. Thematic concentration for policy objective 2 and policy objective 4. And also in relation to the governance specific objective, ensuring that that was there to support addressing border obstacles and difficulties, and it was not about providing additional funding to programme authorities. All of those areas were very much linked to the Parliament's priorities during the trilogue discussions. From the Council side, Council stuck very closely to its initial position. It resisted elements that would be overly restrictive on an implementation point, from its perspective at least. For example, Council could live with encouraging support for smaller projects in general, but without making small project funds binding everywhere. And while Council in the end was willing to accept the obligatory nature of support for policy objective 2, given its political priority, and even policy objective 4 on an internal cross-border basis, since all internal cross-border programs already support such activities. So that's a little bit how the Council reacted to this kind of situation. If it wasn't imposing something over and above what programs were already doing, then they were willing to find a compromise in those areas. And clearly, as I mentioned already in relation to policy objective 4, given the priority that health will have over the next programming period, it obviously made a degree of sense there too. For the Commission, we recognised that we hadn't convinced the co-legislators about rethinking the overall approach on architecture, but we prioritised the importance of maintaining the key simplification elements in the discussions. And we wanted to ensure that those elements that permit and encourage a more strategic approach within programmes was retained as part of the overall regulatory outcome. That's something that we'll be watching carefully during programme preparation. And to pick up one example of this from my side for you, just because the regulation specifically allows for continuity and coherence in the definition of programme areas, that doesn't translate to an automaticity for the Commission accepting any such proposals on the table. We want to see and understand the justifications, the rationale, the logic behind the shape of cooperation that is being proposed. How will this help the programme areas? How will this deliver what we want to see Interreg deliver? Those are the type of discussions that we will be having in the weeks and months ahead. So where did that leave us as we come out of that trilogue process? Well, the pandemic and its impact have hit our overall timing, as you might imagine, and that's why the political agreement was reached only in December last year. But it's interesting to note that when we started that trilogue process, as I said, in October 2019, the timing schedule that the trilogue exercise identified was for a 12-month period. So even at that stage, October 2020 was the estimated finish time. So despite the whole pandemic and the COVID crisis, we've ended up only a couple of months behind that original schedule. Although, to be honest, given how smoothly the negotiations have gone, it may well have been that we would have finished early, at least for the Interreg file, compared to some of the other files. Now, the regulation will be published only in June this year. And here I just want to explain a little that after that political agreement in December, we enter into, again, another unique, some might again say weird process, I would say detailed process of lawyer linguist review, translation into all 24 languages, alignment with all the other regulations, a verification of cross-checking references, etc., to make sure that article references all match up, all of which has to be followed by the formal approval process by the co-legislators, by the Parliament and the Council. And this means that publication is estimated for June. And all of this is going on now. What we are doing on the Commission side is we're preparing a very limited number of pieces of secondary legislation that will be ready in June as well. And here I want to emphasize a final point, final element of simplification, if you like, from my side. Gone are the dozens of items of secondary legislation that exist in the 2014-2020 period. Almost all of these have been replaced by either annexes or direct content in the articles, in the CPR, in the Interreg regulation. Program templates, Interreg eligibility rules, payment application templates, audit annexes, communication rules, systems for e-cohesion, all of that is already established directly in the primary legislation. There is no waiting, there are no delays for secondary legislation in these areas. It's all there already. And you know that, of course, because you've already read and memorized the regulations. The remaining elements, so these that you can see on the screen here, which are essentially technical implementing decisions, formally confirming allocations per member state, identification of program areas, allocations per program, will all be published as soon as possible after the CPR and the Interreg regulation is published in June. And once those are published, very bluntly, my job will be done. And the future and the success of Interreg will be in your hands. And I wish you all the very best of luck. Thank you for listening.
Thank you, Murray. It was very exciting also with cliffhangers and everything. It was really good. And now, without further waiting, please, Pascal, floor is yours.
Thank you, Ivana, and good morning, everybody. Also from my behalf. And after the introduction of Murray, how the negotiations took place and how the regulations will look like, it's now my duty to explain to you how are we going to translate this into practice, into concrete programs. And so my presentation is maybe not so optimistic, how to do more with less. With less, especially talking about less budget available. And also from our side, we regret, of course, that there's less money available under Interreg for the next program period. Not only in absolute terms, but also in relative terms, the share of Interreg has decreased, despite many member states and Parliament also supporting us. But this is the fact as it is right now. From our point of view, the consequence of this is, if we really want to generate impact with our programs, we have to indeed have a stronger strategic thinking, which Murray already underlined, but also a stronger need for a thematic and territorial focus. So really make clear choices on which areas we want to focus and which regions we want to focus. Of course, the Interreg programs will play their part in contributing the overall objective of cohesion policy by having a contribution also to the transition to a smart and low carbon economy. But nevertheless, at the same time, we still need to ensure that we preserve the specific and the unique character of Interreg as a separate strand in cohesion policy. And that territorial cooperation is a different strand under cohesion policy, and we should also preserve that very well. And here I would like to refer, quite a few of you were involved also in the audit report from the Court of Auditors, which will soon be published, on cross-border cooperation, and where one of their recommendations, one of the findings was that in some cases, quite a few projects which are supported under our programs could in principle also be supported under the mainstream programs. And I think this is something we should look at also in the future, in the new generation of programs, that we really focus on really projects which characterize the Interreg character, territorial cooperation, and do not continue with, for example, some mirror projects, which the court observed, which would undermine on the long term the character of Interreg. Can go to the next slide. On the process, what we have been doing while Murray and his team were negotiating the regulations, we started up already with you to reach out and to discuss already your draft programs, to give our input at a very early stage. And I think we've done this earlier than in previous program periods, and really want to participate actively in the informal dialogue. 2 examples. We prepared the orientation papers, BOPs, MOPs, and whatever we had for all the borders over Europe. and where we mainly wanted to share with you the facts and the data which we have at our disposal, and also to give you some suggestions for input for the debate. They were clearly not negotiation mandates, but really our contribution to the informal dialogue. And secondly, well, one of the very few positive side effects maybe of the pandemic is that we have been able to participate much more actively in programming task force, because many meetings took place, or almost all meetings took place via video conferences. So which allowed us to participate also more actively in these preparatory working groups. And normally in normal circumstances, probably there would have been physical meetings, and there we could not have been, certainly not have been participating in all those meetings. That offered us the opportunity to understand at a very early phase more your questions, your needs. And also we had the opportunity to already inform you at an early stage what were our priorities and what were our ideas. And ideally, we hope that we have reached already, in some cases, already good agreement on some mature draft programs, which some of them we have already received. So that once we get into the formal phase, when you formally submit your programs, that we can save a lot of time, because you know what were our priorities, we know what were your priorities, and that the programs which we are receive are of good quality, and we can get them rather quickly through the process. One important point Maura already mentioned is that we still need to work on the implementing acts, and especially the discussion on the program areas, which is still ongoing right now. And we sent you a letter in mid-February, and we received reactions now from most of the member states. We're still waiting for a few. And we hope to reach an agreement with you as soon as possible after our internal discussion also with the cabinet. But again, pure continuity as an argument is for us not enough. We really would like to see why certain regions would continue to participate in program areas in the future. Next slide, please. I will go through now a few elements which we find very important and which I would like to stress. They probably are not new to you. I guess a lot of the colleagues have already mentioned them in task forces and programming working groups, but nevertheless, I think it's still good to stress them once more. First of all, the partnership principle, nothing new. We stress it every program period, but we are really convinced that a very good partnership principle process helps you to lay the foundation for a successful implementation of the program, and it creates also a stronger ownership by all partners in your region of the program. For that purpose, we reminded you once again, we sent a letter at least to the cross-border programs in January to repeat once more the basic principles of the European Code of Conduct of Partnership and how this can be followed up. Well, first of all, we think it's important that involve all those who are concerned or affected by the program have the possibility to have a say on the drafting of the program and also during the implementation of the program. So it's not important only to involve the partners during the implementation, but at all stages, during the preparation, during the selection, the monitoring, and of course during the implementation. And it's much wider than only the national and the regional public authorities. We think here about also the local authorities, larger cities, for example, economic and social partners, chambers of commerce, transport operators, for example, civil society, relevant NGOs, associations, and last but not least, also cross-border bodies like EGTCs operating in your region or Euro regions should be part of the consultation process. And also there will be the possibility to offer capacity building from the technical assistance to develop the capacity of those partners to help them and to contribute more effectively to the program. So what we would like to see in the programs which we're going to receive from you, that in the template you really do not use the standard phrases, but really give us information about the representativeness and identification of the partners. How did you consult them? How did you inform them? And also if you want to use this opportunity of capacity building. And I think all over Europe, we see very good examples of how this partnership principle is being respected by, for example, establishing focus groups for dedicated priorities or organizing regional seminars in sub-regions all over the regions in order to get input and to get bottom input. But we also see some examples where we believe that there's still scope for improvement. The next slide, please. On territorial dimension of Interreg. I think this is a very good example of what Morris said, to have a stronger strategic thinking bringing into the regulation. And the key issue, the key concept, what we introduced here is the focus on functional areas. It's not, the functional areas as such are not defined in the regulation as such, but they are mentioned in one of the recitals. And where from our point of view, it's that cross-border region is not strictly limited to the administrative borders of a program, but has a flexible geography depending on the topic concerned. If we talk about health, if we talk about labor market, if we talk about tourism, and that's how we see a functional area. And for some type of solutions, you can only find partners for projects which are outside the program area, and we find it totally justified. When you need a university for an R&D project, when you invest in flood risk reduction, then you might need to do investments outside the program area. But for other topics, the solution can be much more at local level, purely local. And there we can also see the possibility to define more smaller areas within your program area. So from our point of view, the problem solving should be based on functional areas than rather on the administrative scale defining the program area. What matters is that the right projects benefit the cross-border area, and the location of the project or the location of the partners is of secondary importance. And that's how we think, where we try to bring in the strategic approach. So you could have within one program different functional areas depending on the topic you're talking about. So we give much more flexibility than in previous program periods to support partners and projects outside the program areas, as long as the benefit of these projects is clearly for the program area as such. And of course, we also have the dedicated policy objective 5 for the policy objective for Europe closer to citizens, where we can look for more customized solutions for specific sub-regions within a program area, especially for larger program areas. This can be interesting, or when you have a program area which is very heterogeneous, where you can look for a more tailor-made solution for approach to address the specific challenges and needs of those sub-regions. And this is something, I think, also an innovation which we have introduced in the regulation, and which can be used by the member states and the program authorities, and use also the dedicated tools like ITI, CLLD, or national or regional tools available. The next slide, please. Then, of course, beyond the standard architecture offered to all programs, and also the mainstream programs, of course, an innovation for Interreg is that we have these 2 new Interreg-specific objectives. The better governance, cooperation governance, and the safer and more secure Europe. And I think you will also discuss them later on during the day. Again, also to keep it short, but for me, the better cooperation governance, again, is a good example of how we have been trying to bring more strategic thinking into the architecture of the regulation. For me, the better cooperation governance is clearly a translation of the communication which we published in 2017 on boosting the potential of border regions, that we should not look only on pure investments into projects, but what we can do also beyond funding, how we can improve institutional cooperation, how we can reduce administrative and legal obstacles, because there's still a lot to be gained, and where we can still exploit much better the potential of in this case, border regions. So there's a clear link of this specific objective with the actions which we undertake under the border focal point, and where we can learn from the actions under the border focal point, but also, again, where we can learn lessons from the investments under your programs under this new objective, and which can feed into the border focal point. Our original proposal was that it should become obligatory for some type of programs. It's now voluntary, but I'm happy to see that quite a lot of programs actually are planning to program this into the new generation of programs. So, and here again, we would welcome initiatives like working on cross-border obstacles, the people-to-people projects, working on better statistics, which is also something which is recommended by the Court of Auditors. Clearly, to underline, I think it's understood by everybody, but just once more to underline, this is not an extension of the technical assistance. All the actions related to the direct implementation of the program should be funded by technical assistance. And the second specific objective, a safer and more secure Europe. Again, here it has been opened up now for all programs, and where you have the opportunity to work on border crossing management structures, mobility and migration management, but also the protection of migrants, which can also be for some regions in Europe an important topic to be addressed. My last slide's also looking a little bit at the time. Two last slides, the next slide, please. On coordination and embedding of cooperation. Well, obviously, our Interreg programs do not operate in isolation. They operate in regions which are also covered by other programs, whether they're funded by the EU or by national funds. I think here there are two important elements to stress. First of all, Maury mentioned that one of the points which we did not, which our proposal was not accepted by Parliament and Council, was on the maritime cooperation. So where the idea was to bring maritime programs and cross-border programs together with transnational programs per sea basin. We have accepted this, of course, but nevertheless, I think also what was said by all the programs involved, that there's still strong agreement that there's a stronger need for better coordination and to avoid overlap and doubling of activities. So I think first of all, it's important to seek for better coordination and complementarities within the Interreg family. So first of all, of course, where relevant, to have a clear link with the macro-regional strategies, but then also secondly, within sea basins, for example, how we can link better the different Interreg strands. And I think together with Interreg, we had set up some interesting workshops for the Mediterranean, Adriatic, Ionian Sea, and for the Baltic Sea region, where I think there was a good willingness and strong willingness and interest of those programs to reach out to each other and to cooperate better. But secondly, also it's important to that cooperation is not only the responsibility of Interreg programs. Cooperation is a topic which concerns all programs, also the mainstream programs. So here we've also been promoting that cooperation should be more embedded also in the mainstream programs. And a good example here, for example, could be that how these programs could cooperate together. We published in 2018 the study on the missing links in railways, which was a study under the border focal point. And now quite a few programs are following up on this by looking what could be interesting projects for our regions to follow up. Then with Interreg, you could, for example, support feasibility studies, environmental impact assessments for that type of new investments. And once they're proven to be profitable, then they could be taken up by mainstream programs or programs under national funding. And we will look from our side, the mainstream programs which we receive now for inter-service consultation, that this topic is also sufficiently addressed in the mainstream programs. And we hope that this also will be a new opportunity offered under the new regulations. And then my last slides on small projects and simplified cost options. I will keep it very short because I know you're going to discuss this later on in one of the workshops. But just again, to underline, these are tools, new tools introduced into the regulation to facilitate less administrative burden, especially for smaller beneficiaries and recipients of funds. And so first of all, it's optional, it's not obligatory, so you can choose from this, but the idea behind the Commission was to see how we can reduce the administrative burden, especially for those smaller beneficiaries. And under the small project fund, we think it offers possibilities for making the administration simpler. We could support more projects with more impact, and we could also offer more tailor-made assistance to projects by professional organizations which are, let's say, specifically targeted for a dedicated region or for a specific topic. I know there were a lot of questions, and we still are receiving a lot of questions about small project funds, about the interpretation of the regulation. But I just want to underline once more, the idea behind this was simplification to make the life easier, especially for beneficiaries and recipients of funds. And I hope that also in your design of the programs that this will prevail when you're discussing if you want to use small project funds or not. That's everything from my side, and I would say from our side, if I also speak on behalf of Maura, as for the introduction.